Hi, I'm Dr. Emma Ross. I'm a female athlete health specialist and I co-founded the Well HQ, which is really aimed to educate coaches and athletes about women's bodies in sport.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like you've covered a very important time. It feels like with the growth of the game, we're also having a massive growth in these injuries. And yeah, it just feels like it's really becoming a bit endemic in the women's game. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you play football at a high level, there is always a risk of injury, and ACL, unfortunately, is a very common injury in football because of the nature of running, jumping, turning, sprinting, stopping. But we do know we've got enough research to suggest that in female players, the ACL risk is greater, and that really seems to be coming through in reality, doesn't it? That we're seeing a number of female players suffering ACL injury time and time again, and it's not a new phenomenon, but we don't seem to be getting on top of managing that.
Can we pinpoint a specific reason why women, like per some studies, are up to, is it 6 times more likely to suffer an ACL injury? I know there's lots of reasons that fly about, whether it's menstrual cycle or kind of biometrics, or, is it that easy to kind of pinpoint reasons?
Injury is not easy, full stop. It's such a complex thing because it doesn't happen because of one particular thing. And when we're talking about ACL injuries, the data you described shows that female athletes are anywhere up to 8 times more likely to suffer a non-contact ACL injury. So that's not someone running in and hitting them at the knee joint. It's them, not making contact with anyone and still doing damage to their knee joint. And on average, the research shows there is about a 4.5 times greater risk in female athletes. Now, because injury is complex, we know that there are a number of things that contribute to that increased injury risk. And understanding those is really important because as an athlete, like I say, you go out onto the football pitch and you know that there is a risk of injury. And if in your preparation and your training and your recovery, you can do everything you can to reduce all of those risk factors, then you walk onto the pitch knowing, that you've done your best. So, for example, in females, there are things we know we can't change, like our skeleton. So because we're the childbearing half of the human race, we have wider hips so that we can give birth to children. But those wider hips means that we have a greater angle between our hips and our knees. And that in itself changes our biomechanics. And it means that we put greater angular stress through our knee joint. And that is an injury risk factor. But on its own, that's usually not enough. And we have to sort of pile on all the other risk factors. You mentioned menstrual cycle, and in football and actually in lots of other game sports, there's been headlines in the past about whether the menstrual cycle is a factor in injury. Now, we know that the hormones of the menstrual cycle might affect joints. So we know that estrogen affects the laxity or the looseness of a joint and makes it slightly more loose. And looseness is an increased injury risk factor. So if you've got a looser joint, it's not as stable and you might not have as much control. But again, on its own, that's not going to be enough. So that's just another layer of sort of female-specific risk. And then some of the other things that come up for female football players are that we're generally less good at moving as women. So from the age of about 5, there becomes a gender play gap. So girls and boys move and play differently. And that means we develop an ability to move our bodies differently. And then that manifests in sport. So when you talk to football coaches, you notice that when they've trained guys and then they go and train women, they see a sort of movement deficiency. We just don't move as well. Sometimes that can look like when we're landing from jumps, our knees cave in, or we don't have good movement techniques when we're doing things like sprinting or squatting or in the gym. And that's all really important because moving and being stable, but yet mobile and strong and powerful and having really good form is a really good sort of injury prevention mechanism. So we don't move as well. We have muscle imbalance as females. So we tend to have an imbalance in our legs in terms of muscle strength. Our quadriceps, that's the big muscle at the front, tends to get stronger. And we tend to ignore our glutes and our hamstrings when we are training and conditioning our body as women, not consciously, but just that's the way we're wired. And that means we don't tap into the amazing power of our glutes and our hamstrings, and we cause an imbalance, which is another risk factor. So you start to pile all these things up. And these are female specific things. And then you add in what we call environmental factors, which might be we don't have very many female boots for female players. So when you put a female football player in a male boot, which has had a huge amount of technology put into it to make it amazing, but that's based on a male foot. Now, a male foot is a different shape. It's longer. It has a wider heel. And so it's not based on the shape of a female foot, but it's also not based on the load that goes through the foot. So if you think about a man moving, he's going to be taller, he's going to be heavier, he's going to have more strength. That's just a basic kind of sex difference. And so when they're designing the fit of the shoe and the studs and how long they are and where they're placed and what they're made of and how rigid the shoe is, that's all based on the force that's being generated by a male body. And so when you put those boots on a female, it just doesn't work. And that can be an increased risk factor as well for injury. So again, if you throw all these things in the mix and then you throw in something like the fact that the women have had a busy summer of football and now they've gone into their season and they might be slightly more tired, fatigued, less recovered than they would have been in another year, you add these other risk factors on and suddenly you get the perfect storm.
Wow, that's fascinating. Load actually is something we've been talking about quite a bit and a lot of managers have been talking about recently, with the number of international breaks, with major tournaments back to back now because of the pandemic, and we're now getting a Nations League being added in by UEFA. You know, there's a new format in the Champions League, so they're, you know, top teams are playing more regularly. That also, I'm assuming, as you say, is a factor because I guess it takes the body a while to get used to an increase in load, whereas it feels like it's happening very quickly in the women's game.
Yeah, and I think we have to remember that, you know, female football has had an exponential rise in terms of what we're seeing, the coverage, but also that means the games that the women are playing, the quality, and the amount they're having to train, the professional contracts, meaning that they now, you know, are training more. And that means that these girls haven't been doing that all their lives, like perhaps some of their male counterparts. And so it is a massive change. And we have to, when we create these systems and we get really excited about the opportunities that we give athletes, we have to remember that there's a human body in the middle of it and make sure we're taking care of that. And I think in the women's game, we also, again, need to make sure there's the resources around those players. So we know in the men's game that some of these clubs have extraordinary facilities for recovery and rehabilitation and prehabilitation and really wrapping those players up as much as they can, and supporting them to be strong, robust athletes. And we need to make sure that we do that in the women's game. And at the moment, there isn't as much equity as we'd like to see. So female player health and well-being and their ability to show up and be the best player on the pitch on any given day, you know, is going to be limited if we don't surround those players with the resources that we see surrounding, you know, the male players, because the load and the demand is great when you're playing week in, week out.
I'm trying to make a list of players in 2022 that have had long-term or ACL injuries. I think a lot of them are ACL injuries. It's coming up to maybe 40 or 50 athletes at this stage from looking at the professional game, not just in England, obviously, which just seems crazy. And you touched there on equity in terms of resources, but in terms of like knowledge, I assume that's quite an important thing as well, because you talk about how we, you know, exercise our muscles differently. Is part of that down to the fact that we're doing, say, fitness that maybe was designed for male players or maybe isn't specific to female bodies? Like, do you feel like there's enough research in terms of how to train a female athlete?
Yeah, that's one big gap that we know we have. So we published a paper last year which looked at all of the research into sports performance in the sport and exercise science field. And we looked at who was being studied, and only 6% of the research was done exclusively on female participant groups. So we know very little really about how to optimise the support of female athletes. When we talk about training, when we talk about nutritional approaches, when we talk about recovery, when we talk about injury, you know, there's a lot we don't even know yet. And when we are trying to support athletes, we're trying to go to the research and say, what's the best approach? And oftentimes we are taking an approach that we know is effective in men, and we're assuming that it will work in women, and we can't always make that assumption. So, for example, we know that energy balance is vital for female athletes. And what that means is that when they're training a lot, they get enough energy through their diet to balance out that energy demand. Because we know that in the female body, the response to not having enough energy is different than in a male body. So in a female body, if we don't have enough energy, if we're training loads and we're not eating enough, the first thing our female body says is, well, first of all, we're wired for survival. So I cannot survive and carry a baby at this time. That would kill me. So because I don't have enough energy, so I'm going to turn off my reproductive system. And also that will save me energy. And also it won't matter because I can still walk around and I can still play football. So your body, that's the first thing that sort of gets shut down when we are in this energy deficit. And actually that's more common than we think in athletes who are, trying to manage eating enough to fuel all of this training. And whilst shutting down the reproductive system might seem okay because these players might not want to start a family at the moment. So you might think, well, why would they need the reproductive system? But we know that the hormones of our reproductive system are absolutely vital for the health and well-being of these female athletes. So bone health, so protective against injury, but also building bone strength, immune function, cardiovascular health, brain health. We know that there's an increased risk of mental health issues when you've got energy deficit and you lose these hormones. So understanding all of that, when I say it like that, you think, well, that would be really important if you're working with athletes, particularly as some of the research shows that 50% of soccer players, it was done in the US, are in energy deficit most of the time. They're not eating enough to fuel their training. You think, wow, we should probably be all over that, but we're not, and we don't have enough research, and then we don't have enough education of the coaches, the sports scientists, and the players themselves about all of these sort of sex-specific factors which can affect a player's health and performance. So we really need to up the research, but we also need to up the translation of the research to make sure that those people working in women's football know best practice.
In terms of the mental health side of things, have you had experience kind of dealing with the impact of what it's like to do your ACL? And would you have any tools or suggestions that people could employ during this recovery process?
Yeah, I think for some time, the psychological and mental side of injury was overlooked, and we focus on the physical, but actually there's a huge psychological element. You suddenly can't do the thing that completely, was your identity, and you can't be with your tribe. Your body doesn't work in the way you want it to work. All of those factors can really affect someone's mental health. And it's very individual. So the support that we give players has to be individual in the context of them and what they're going through. We need to be really aware not to rush players back. So sometimes it can be a badge of honour to say, I was back on the pitch, X number of weeks after I had an ACL injury or surgery. Whereas actually then those players might be more at risk of being re-injured. So it's not a badge of honour about the speed, it's about making sure it's the right time. And the way we can kind of get that right is not just to physically rehabilitate someone, but make sure we're supporting them emotionally and mentally so they don't feel like they need to rush back in. They feel like they're confident enough to take their time. But I think for any team player, being injured and being apart from your team is really hard. And so actually, if there's one thing you could do, it would be to find ways to show up and be with those people. And whether that's going to training and watching and helping, the take notes on people's performance, or whether that's meeting for lunch after training, staying connected to your team and to your tribe is really important. And having a really good plan so you can see the process and you can see how it might progress, and giving yourself benchmarks so that you can go, oh, wow, look, 3 weeks ago I couldn't do this and now I can do this. I'm making progress, because we know that, having goals that are really attainable and realistic, it is really helpful psychologically when you're on a long journey back. So we just really have to support the whole player when players get injured. And we know that, for example, 45% of people who have an ACL injury don't ever return to competitive sport again. And that's huge. And the players at the highest level obviously have really good support. So they will be in the bunch of people who have the best support to get back. But there is a real risk that players won't. So we have to do all we can to support them and really increase their chances of getting back on the pitch and getting back to the level they were at before.